What is happening? What is this? I don't even know what this is. You're expecting me to know what that is? If you haven't had the pleasure of watching Rebel Moon Part 1 on Netflix, I highly recommend you go watch it and then come back. Or if you don't want to waste any more time, you can just listen to me break it down and explain why Rebel Moon flopped. Now, I notoriously love what other people consider bad movies, and I am the type of person who will rewatch those beloved bad movies time and time again. But unfortunately, Rebel Moon did not fall into the category of everyone hates this, but I love it. I mean, I still like the original Percy Jackson film, the Transformers franchise, Pacific Rim, and even another poor performing space opera, Valerian. I'm really outing myself here. But so why did I, a self-dubbed queen of bad movies, think Rebel Moon flopped? It really all comes down to these three pillars: pacing and stakes, character development, and world building. And that's what we're going to cover today. When I watched Rebel Moon, I was really drawn in by the allure of a space opera because I love those, gorgeous landscape shots, and a trailer that actually caught my attention. But the promises I was given in the beginning of the story did not really come to fruition. So buckle up, grab your popcorn, as we deep dive into another long video on why Rebel Moon flopped from a writer's perspective. Rebel Moon is a film created by Zack Snyder. And if you don't know much about the film world, Zack Snyder is a love it or hate it kind of guy. He's behind the movies such as Sucker Punch, Watchmen, 300, a lot of DC movies, and my personal favorite, because I am a bad movie queen, Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole. You can't take that one from me. I loved that movie when that came out, and that was like a million years ago, and I don't care. It was a great movie. And according to Wikipedia, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, is an epic space opera that is actually filmed, directed, and co-written by Zack Snyder, so it has a lot of his influence in it. It also features an ensemble cast, and I want you to remember that word because we're going to come back to what that should mean. The film is set in a fictional galaxy ruled by the imperialistic Mother World, whose military, the Imperium, threatens a farming colony on the moon of Velt. Cora, a former Imperium soldier, ventures on a quest to recruit warriors from across the galaxy to make a stand against the Imperium before they return to Velt. The story goes that Zack Snyder attempted to pitch a new Star Wars film to Lucasfilms, and the idea sadly got rejected. He then took that idea to Netflix and has now signed on to a multi-movie and a multimedia deal. I really do hate to be super harsh to this movie because this was a dream Zack Snyder always had as a kid. As an aspiring writer myself, I understand how exciting and hard it is to make an old childhood dream or idea come to life. My qualm, though, is that it actually did have so much potential, and no one decided to help it achieve that potential. So now we have a movie with great graphics, interesting locations, but unfortunately where hollow characters perform actions that just make no sense. Rebel Moon got a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here are just some movies that by Rotten Tomatoes standards did better. The Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas, Planet 51, and Fired Up. And if you don't know what any of these movies are, exactly. On par with Rebel Moon's 22%, we have another recent flop of Pool Man and the classic Barnyard. It seems odd that a galaxy-spanning space opera with intense visual effects would land in the same category as a movie about a carefree cow who learns the meaning of responsibility? But that's just me. The movie instantly feels very Star Wars, and that may be unfair because we do tend to relate any space operas to the success of the Star Wars franchise. But even in the very opening of the movie, we have a section of info dumping, some background to jump us into our story while a slow-moving massive ship floats through space, which is the same opening shot as Star Wars. Kind of like this. Let's take a look. What is this story actually about? Let's do a quick recap. We introduce Cora, a farmer on the moon Velt who is laying low there because she's a refugee and a child of the war the Imperium started. Atticus Noble, who is a sadistic admiral of the Mother World's military, the Imperium, arrives on Velt. He explains his troops are hunting for a band of rebels and needs to use Velt as a station and wants all their surplus grain for his men. The leader of the community, Sindri, refuses this offer and claims that they barely have enough harvest to feed themselves, which isn't true, but he was trying to protect the community because of what Cora was saying. But then the harvest leader, Gunnar, ignores the earlier warnings from Cora and defies Sindri. He tells Atticus that the village actually does have a surplus, and Gunnar wants to protect his community too, but he also wants them to get paid for this extra grain, and he feels like this is a good way to do so. Unfortunately, it was not a good thing, and Atticus Noble brutally kills Sindri and his wife and orders Gunnar to get all the grain from him in 10 weeks' time. Noble then departs and leaves a handful of soldiers to oversee the village and a Jimmy robot to oversee the harvest. We can also just put an X over the Jimmy robot too, because we spend about 20 minutes with him and then never see him again. Cora is ready to leave this moon and run away because she's already gone through this. She's a child of war. She knows what the Imperium will do once they land on your planet. But on her way out, she sees some Imperium soldiers preparing to harm a village girl and instead comes to her aid and kills all of the soldiers. Cora then warns the villagers that the Imperium will come back and destroy them all unless they mount a defense. Cora and Gunnar then set out to go find General Titus, a kind of mythical general who is against the Imperium, as well as the rebel group that Gunnar sold the excess grain to last year, because they're going to need help. And they end up traveling to the port city of Providence to go do so. Instead of finding the rebel group, they meet the criminal Kai, who agrees to help them on their journey because he has a ship. On the way to grab this rebel group or figure out where they are, they also obtain a ton of other infamous warriors of the galaxy as well. Throughout this time, we learn that Cora is actually an ex-Imperium soldier, having been adopted and renamed to Arthelaus by Belisarius, the Imperium commander, after the Imperium killed her family and eradicated her home planet's population. So she's now on the run. That's why she was in Velt, and she's going by the name of Cora. In the end, Kai actually ends up betraying the group by turning them all into Atticus Noble, because Kai is actually a bounty hunter. They all get locked up, a battle ensues, Darian dies, and Cora kills Atticus. The surviving warriors and some new person to take Darian's place that we don't know who that is, returns to Velt to do all that was promised, but in the second movie instead of this one. And oh, surprise, Atticus actually isn't dead. So let's talk about pacing and stakes after I just try to recap what this movie's about. This movie at its core is trying to be a let's get a gang together to perform a task type of story. This is commonly seen in the form of heists or in this case, rebellions. Well, imagine if you were putting together a group to perform a heist, but no one spoke to each other. Like, actually, no one said any words to each other. Just imagine that. And then as soon as they entered the building to pull off this heist, they actually all get put in handcuffs. Yeah, that wouldn't be very fun, would it? That's legitimately what happens in this movie. And to have great pacing means to have great story structure. To have great stakes, you need to introduce conflict and obstacles that are in the way of a hero's goals until the final resolution is had, whatever that may be, a win or a fail. Unfortunately, this story doesn't have any of that. The build-up to kicking off our main storyline is about 38 minutes into this movie. If we were to take the save the cat logic, knowing that our first act should be about 20% of the story, then this should have happened around 17 minutes. You might think this is like really nitpicky of me until you realize that we have 20 minutes of storyline that goes nowhere. Doesn't relate to the main character or the main storyline at all. Let's deep dive into that for a moment. When Atticus Noble and the Imperium lands on Velt, we have a young soldier who lock eyes with a young girl from the village. This is supposed to insinuate some sort of romantic connection, and in doing so, this sets us up to expect more from these characters. When the soldiers are unloading supplies, they open up what is called a Jimmy, a robot that used to be a soldier that protected the royal family. Upon their assassination, the robots no longer fight, which is a really cool concept. To showcase, though, how big bad the bad guys are, we have one soldier who shoots the Jimmy for fun because he can't fight back. The young soldier steps in to protect Jimmy, showcasing that he's not like other bad guys. Jimmy then goes down to the river to wash the dust off of him, and the young girl from the village comes to sit with him. They have an emotional talk where Jimmy explains that she reminds him of the Princess Isa, who was assassinated alongside her parents, and how she was to usher peace into this world. He seemingly longs for peace himself, and the young girl cups his cheek, saying that peace lives in him. It's actually a very sweet moment, if it meant something in the long run. But instead, that same young girl is taken by the big bad soldiers later that night in an attempt to harm her. The young soldier comes in to defend her, and so does Cora when she comes in and kills them all. Later on, the robot actually appears. He picks up a gun, shoots the last guy, and runs away. This is a nice little short story within the longer story. Sure, but it begs the question, why did any of this have to happen? We never see any of these characters again. And it's a 2-hour and 14-minute movie. My problem with this will be my problem with everything about this movie. We seemingly get glimpses into interesting stories, people, and world-building elements, but never actually explore any of them. Instead, we say bye to 3 characters that took up the majority of the first act to go follow a whole new cast of people. At this point, the story isn't even about Cora. It was about those 3. Cora was barely in the scenes where the inciting incident of the Imperium coming to Velt happened. She lingered in the background, like actually literally in the background, and we got a snapshot of her for like 20 seconds. If this happened in a book, you'd have major problems. Who you focus on in the beginning is important. It really just begs the question of whose story are you trying to tell? What would have made this more interesting was if the young soldier or Jimmy actually joined our crew. Then it would have had real payoff. The young soldier could have actually become a rebel and grown into a foil for the Imperium. Jimmy could have taken up arms for a worthy cause, and we would have had a bigger emotional payoff. But since when we learn that Jimmy doesn't fight anymore and when he actually shoots a gun is about 7 to 10 minutes apart, there really isn't any real weight to it. We instead just have a sped up snapshot of two side characters who got their 15 minutes of fame. The main storyline is supposed to be Cora and Gunnar leave their farming village to find General Titus and a rebel group that Gunnar sold grain to last harvest, and to convince them to come help fight the Imperium when they return in 10 weeks for their grain and realize all the soldiers they placed there are dead. We have a finite amount of time to complete this goal, 10 weeks. But in the story, we actually don't have any sense of time while getting the gang together. Cora even mentions to one of our characters that she wants them to train her village too, but we don't even know how long they are out there for. And this leads to no sense of urgency because we have no sense of time while traveling through space. How long does it take to get from planet to planet? How long to pick up each character? This could have been a great way to raise the stakes in this film by creating urgency, but there just isn't any of that. But let's take a look at how this goal of finding the rebel group progresses in a goal, obstacle, action, event sequence. First, we have a goal, which is find the rebel group. The obstacle that we face is that Cora and Gunnar actually do not know the exact location of this rebel group because Gunnar relayed information and the surplus grain kind of through a middleman. So their action is to go find the person who was that middleman for Gunnar. And he was located in the city of Providence. When they get to Providence, they come across another obstacle. The person that was this middleman is actually being taken away by bounty hunters. So their action is to then go to a local bar to ask around for information. This is where things start to get weird. An obstacle is that an alien wants to buy Gunnar because they think that Cora is kind of his keeper and they want to buy Gunnar from her. The action then, after getting that alien to leave, Cora yells into the crowd and asks where General Titus is, which I already thought was strange because you don't know anyone in this bar and you don't know if there are Imperium sympathizers there, and you're just yelling where this guy who's supposed to have galaxy-renowned fame for not liking the Imperium. It was weird. And then another obstacle, that alien who wanted to buy Gunnar comes back with a couple people and tries to kill Cora and Gunnar. So Cora then fights them because she's this epic fighter and ends up killing them instead. After that, Kai, our criminal who enters the scene, offers to fly Cora and Gunnar to where General Titus is. Outside of the unnecessary sexual assault that we have yet again because this alien is trying to buy Gunnar for sexual favors, the obstacle of the alien wanting to buy Gunnar is not needed. We already had an obstacle in this scene. Sure, you could say that this obstacle shows us that the bar and the city is like a seedy place of underground dealings. But why? We only see this place for this scene, and then we leave the planet entirely. Every scene should move the plot forward, and this one seriously does not have a point to it. Like previous scenes we've already gone over. A lot of the movie happens this way. It feels choppy. Every time we get a moment to settle into something interesting, whether that be a place, a person, or a world-building element, we are whisked away to somewhere else entirely. The movie is constantly competing for what story is being told. Is this a story about a farmer saving his home planet? Is this a story about a woman killing a child-snatching spider as revenge for her own children's deaths? Yeah, that happens. Is this a story about a bounty hunter betraying a group of bonded-together heroes? Is this a story about a robot sworn off violence only to take up the sword against a righteous cause? Unfortunately, it is None of those, because it's trying to be all of those and so much more. Let's talk about character development. This movie would have been a lot better if we fleshed out our ensemble cast. But instead, we just get pickup scenes for each of them. And like I said in the beginning, they literally do not talk to each other, and then they instantly get captured. So by the time we reach the end fight scene and we realize Kai is betraying them, I didn't even care. Why? Because there was no character development or relationship development to even be able to call this an ensemble cast. So what is an ensemble cast? Like I have up here on the screen, an ensemble cast is when every character in the group shares an equal amount of importance to the story and share in the desire to achieve this goal that they will eventually achieve or fail, but they will do it together. Often an ensemble cast will still have one character as the spearheaded leader. In this story, we do have our spearheaded leader as Cora over here, but I'm going to come back to Cora later. Let's look at the other pieces of the group that we pulled together. Let's start with Gunnar. Gunnar is also a farmer on Velt and is the one who gets his community leader killed by disobeying him and telling the Imperium they do usually have surplus grain. We can tell that Gunnar wants what is best for his community, even if he got it horribly wrong in the beginning of the movie. So his motivation for the goal is to really save his community, and that does come through. But what does Gunnar need? I have no idea, because outside of the first act on Velt and the very end, he barely speaks the rest of the movie. He's actually supposed to be in love with Cora. But the only part we see of that is a longing stare in the beginning, which seems to be this movie's go-to for showing feelings. Gunnar and Cora never have any sort of talk that isn't filling in backstory for Cora. So when it comes down to this emotional moment that we're having down here at the bottom of will Gunnar save himself in the end or save Cora and this crew, him saving Cora actually doesn't have any weight to it, which seems to be a theme in this movie. I just figured he would save her because they're kind of in this together, right? There was no tension built up along the way of, will Gunnar prioritize his community above everyone else? Will Gunnar prioritize himself? Does Gunnar actually love Cora? There's no tension built up around this will he, won't he, for Gunnar's final character arc move. Then we have Kai. He's our bounty hunter who sells himself instead as an opportunist to Cora and Gunnar to hide the fact that he's a bounty hunter, and allows them to use his ship even if they can't pay him much. He is the one who leads them to round up Tarek and Nemesis on top of General Titus and the Blood Axes, so that when he betrays them, he has now rounded up a ton of enemies to the Imperium. So what does Kai want? It seems like in its very basic form, I can guess that it's money. So his motivation to do this is money. What does Kai need? You'll probably see a theme. I don't know. I don't know who Kai is outside of a bounty hunter and a betrayer, which is not great. If you are setting up for a big betrayal, you should have the reader or viewer believe that this guy is not that. You want us rooting for him so that when he does betray, it's a surprise to everyone. And it actually hurts. But it wasn't a surprise at all. And it wasn't even that I guessed it. It was actually that I didn't care. My husband did guess it though. Then we come to the part of the movie, the pickup scenes where we get Tarek, Nemesis, General Titus, and Darien that I just have such a big issue with. We land on a different planet to pick up our first group member, Tarek. He is held captive by a rancher to pay off his debt to him. When asked what got him chained up, he just answers a long road of mistakes. Important lesson. If you want us to care about this guy, if you want us to care about the character, let us care. What did Tarek do? Is he also a rebel? What causes did he support? What trouble did he get into? Did he think he was causing trouble? We have no clue what got him in his current state. The rancher also asks for 300,000 dirham for him, which we have no idea how much that actually is outside of attributing our own currencies onto it. And they don't have that kind of money, of course. So instead, the rancher says he loves to gamble. If Tariq can claim or tame this black griffin and ride him, then he can go free. But if he can't, then they all get in chains. I thought this was a pretty okay plot point because it does up the tension as to what will happen. But of course, Tariq calms the griffin and rides it. This whole scene, though, with Tariq from beginning to end is steeped in a lot of Native American appropriation. I am not the appropriate person to comment on this in depth, but it is very evident, and it continues to perpetuate the issues with fantasy and sci-fi that we consistently have. A lot of creators will make caricatures of current cultures and people in made-up settings, and it just absolutely cheapens the world building. So Tariq ends up taming the griffin, and then the griffin kills the rancher. That scene should have been impactful, but it isn't. Why is it not? Because I don't know anything about Tariq, really. I don't know the hardship that he might have faced under the rancher. I know nothing of the assumed horrible nature of the rancher. And if we do not know, then we can't care. If we don't know, we can't care. I need that on a mug. It's so important. And also, selfishly, I think what would have been cooler still and had a better emotional payoff of this whole griffin scene is if the griffin got to come with us. He should jump in the ship with us. But nope. The griffin stays in the desert, again, never to be seen. So, what does Tariq want? It could assume that he wants to be free. But since he gets that within his 5-minute scene, I am unsure of the motivation for him to join this cause that seems to be doomed. What does Tariq want? I have no idea. Then we head to a coal mining planet to get Nemesis. This planet is a stereotypical science fiction big city with dirt, grime, smog. As you can see, all these electrical wires hanging everywhere. It's very much a city in a sci-fi world. As Kai speaks to Nemesis about what they need, a member of the community comes up to Nemesis screaming. Nemesis knows exactly what this woman needs help with. She goes through a plastic curtain and then fights a giant woman spider. Yes, it's as crazy as that sentence just sounded. This woman spider takes children in retribution for humans coming in and ruining her home and planet. Again, a very cool concept that we get to see for 5 minutes. Then Nemesis fights this spider using these kind of makeshift lightsaber swords. I distinctly remember getting to this scene and turning to my husband and saying, wait, what is going on? It just felt like a completely different movie. Because, yeah, she kills the spider, but then we're right back on the ship. So what does Nemesis want? No idea. What does she need? No idea. What are her motivations? Again, no idea. Because even in this short pickup, we didn't even get a scene where she's like, I'm in. And I also don't know why she's wearing a witch hat. I like it, but I'm unsure why. Now let's return to Korra. After we pick up Nemesis, we have a scene on the ship where we yet again travel to Korra's past. Everything interesting about Korra happens in flashbacks. We learn that she was ex-Imperium after being adopted by Belisarius and her planet destroyed after they set off on the journey. We now learn in this past scene that she was actually given the honor of being a bodyguard for Princess Issa. Korra's wants is seemingly to get revenge on the Imperium, but we still have to assume this. Even though she tells her backstory and we get it in flashbacks, there is no present emotion for what is driving her to revenge. I can assume she wants revenge since they destroyed her family and her planet, but we also get scenes of her being a dutiful Imperium soldier, someone who metaphorically drank the Kool-Aid and was good at it. So, when did Cora leave the Emporium? Why did Cora leave the Imperium? How did Cora leave the Imperium? We just don't know. This doesn't give us any insight into the why behind her revenge. Like I said before, if you want us to care, let us. And if we don't know, we can't care. We do know Cora's need because it's kind of stated in the beginning. She talks about how she isn't capable of love anymore due to her past, which allows us to assume that Cora needs real love in her life and to open up to people again. This is a common main character need in a lot of stories. But she barely has any conversations with any of the cast. So how is she supposed to open up and let love in when she doesn't have a relationship with anyone in the movie? We then land on the moon of Pollux in a makeshift coliseum that is very, hey, this is Rome or Greece. You know, it's like very that time. We're trying to get General Titus, who was one of our original goals as this group. They find General Titus on the streets, drunk and passed out. The group then gets him up while some other lady cleans him off, which is also weird because we don't know who this lady is or what's going on. Cora asks him if he is still the general who led an army for the old king in this exchange. Titus doesn't want to go back to fighting because his men are dead from his surrender and he is tired of living that nightmare every day. This may be the only true purpose we see a bit talked about in these pickup scenes. Cora offers him redemption, but he doesn't want it. So she offers him revenge and he accepts. So General Titus is also in the fight for revenge on the Imperium for killing his men. The issue is that I still don't fully understand why they killed his men. Why did he surrender? Surrender to what? Surrender to whom? There are still so many question marks. We also do not know his need, which is now at this point typical. We then land on the planet of Chiron, where the Blood Axes are being protected by King Levitica. This is the rebel group that Gunnar sold his grain to last harvest, and the one Cora and Gunnar set out to find, and the ones that Atticus Noble is still looking for. Of course we meet King Levitica, but we again have no idea who this guy is or what his planet is about, but we do know that he's giving sanctuary to the Blood Axes. The Blood Axes are a brother and sister duo, so it is Devra and Darien Bloodaxe. Not pictured here, but they command a rebellion that has been successful in tactical takedowns of the Imperium. Cora asks if they will fight and help Velt with their men and their ships, but Darien's sister Devra doesn't want to because she's like, this is a suicide mission. You cannot take the Imperium head on like that. You cannot fight one of their ships. In the end, Darien decides to go and opens it up to his men of who wants to follow. A handful of people come with him and we are off yet again. Darien's want is to uphold his beliefs for the rebellion and fight for what he believes in and not hide behind it. His motivation to go is because he sees himself in this ragtag group before him. We know this because he actually gives a pretty impassioned speech to his group to join him and lays these out. But his need, we yet again do not know. So how could we have fixed this? We could have given all the characters a want and a motivation that is unique to them and their backstory for why they want to fight against the Imperium. We should have had them build relationships with the other characters to form a group that feels unbreakable, so that when they do eventually break it, it means something. It's hurtful. We also should have given these characters their needs and what they really should be after so we can root for them to all find peace and happiness at the end of the day. Okay, enough about character. Let's talk about world building. Like everything else in the story, we actually have a lot of really cool elements that don't get explored. And then eventually feel very out of place, even though they are interesting concepts. So here are some examples I pulled. There are water monsters. Why? I don't know. If you can see here, underneath the ice of this ending scene of the movie, there's like these big water monster fish, which is a cool concept, but what does it mean? I have no idea. We also have a myriad of pleasure devices, it seems, that our bad guy Atticus Noble uses. He has these suction cups, if you can see on him. Here's one, and here's one. And he's like plugging in this machine. It actually looks like, this is so hyper specific, but if you guys play The Sims, it looks like they're like bubbler machine, which is just like a ripoff of like a hookah machine. And that's what it looks like. It looks like The Sims like bubbler machine. But he like hooks it to himself and seemingly gets pleasure. So we're assuming that it is kind of like a hookah or nicotine or some sort of drug. It's a pleasure device. And then literally 5 seconds after using this machine, he then goes to this pleasure leech who does the same thing. I don't know. I was like, okay, cool concept for sci-fi, sure. Why do you have two things that give this bad guy pleasure happening within 5 seconds of each other? I just don't get the point. There's no explanation. We don't see it ever again. I really don't understand. We also then, like I said, have a princess who can bring things back to life. This bird was dead. She brought it back to life. Why? I have no idea. I literally have nothing else to say. Atticus Noble also has a bone stick that he fights with. It's like this big bone artifact. I feel like there has to be a reason. I don't know. It like looks cool, but like it's a bone. Should I know whose bone it is? It's obviously a really big bone of like an animal. I don't know. They also have these scorpion. Oh, sorry. Before I get to the scorpion thing, we also have knockoff lightsabers, as you can see from the last image and this image. We have like swords that light up that aren't on fire but look like they're on fire, and they're just knockoff lightsabers. And then we have these scorpion capture devices, which also are really cool in theory. Like it pops open and it captures the person, and that's like what all of our characters are also captured in at the end. And there's a thing that you put in the back and you can either paralyze the person or unlock it, which also seems like a weird mechanism to paralyze or unlock. It should just do one or the other. But very cool concept in theory. And then we have this thing, because Atticus Noble isn't really dead, of course, because they're never really dead. And he's brought back to life at the end using this thing that attaches to his little suction cups from his pleasure devices. And at the end, I just was like, what is happening? What is this? I don't even know what this is. You're expecting me to know what that is? What are his suction cups? I don't know. I literally, I just have no idea. So like, ooh. So all these elements are cool. Like looking at them, like these are cool concepts for world building, but they don't work together to tell the story. At the end of the day, cool world building concepts does not mean that you have a great and fleshed out world. They just do not equate, unfortunately. And then a final Zack Snyder warning for you all. By the time we get to our goal of bringing these warriors back to the farming village like we see here, the movie ends. And there's a problem nowadays, I think, with movies and sometimes books, but mostly movies in general, that a lot of these stories think their job is to set us up for a sequel. But what really should be happening in a first book or movie is you should be earning the fan base to get you that sequel. You know, like you can get readers or viewers to watch a sequel only if they've bought into the franchise with the payoff from the first movie or book. And we just don't get that. Every story should have a goal that the character either completes or fails. But right before we even see the goal happen, the movie ends. There's no payoff. It just feels so incomplete. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, Zack Snyder has signed into a huge deal where there will be multiple movies, TV shows, comic books, novels, action figures, and so much more. And all for a franchise that's getting annihilated in reviews. So let this be a final Zack Snyder warning. Don't go planning out your story's universe in Harry Potter or Star Wars fashion. Start with the first story you need to tell and make it the best story it can be. Get your readers to care about the characters, their goals, their wants and needs, and the rest will fall into place.